Utilitarianism. It's that philosophy everyone seems to look down upon because it sounds cold and ruthless. You've probably heard of it reduced to the greatest good for the greatest number, which makes it sound like the kind of thinking that justifies sacrificing a few to save the many. Not exactly the kind of thing that wins popularity contests, right? But here's the catch. Utilitarianism, especially John Stuart Mill's version, is far more nuanced than that. It's not about turning people into statistics or asking you to trade your best friend for two strangers. There's real depth to it, and if you dismiss it too quickly, you miss out on some really interesting ideas. So let's break it down and see why Mill's take is one of the most misunderstood and surprisingly humane philosophies out there. First, we've got to talk about Jeremy Bentham, the founder of modern utilitarianism. He was all about maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain, but he didn't really care about what kind of pleasure we're talking about. To Bentham, eating enough ice cream and binge-watching TV could be just as good as reading Dostoevsky and having a breakthrough existential moment. Pleasure is pleasure, right? Well, that's where Mill comes in. John Stuart Mill was Bentham's natural successor. He admired Bentham's commitment to happiness, but thought not all pleasures are created equal. Mill argued that intellectual pleasures, those moments where your brain just lights up from understanding something complex, are better than physical pleasures. Yeah, eating ice cream is great, but it is better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Mill thought it's not just about how much pleasure you get, but what kind of pleasure it is. Deep, meaningful experiences matter more, and that little tweak makes his version of utilitarianism way more thoughtful than it seems on the surface. But there's more. Mill wasn't just about pleasure. He also believed in individual rights in a similar way as we see them today. Mill thought that the best society is one where people are free to develop themselves intellectually and morally. That's why he was a huge advocate for things like women's suffrage, abolition, and even same-sex marriage, at a time where those ideas weren't exactly popular. Mill's utilitarianism wasn't just about maximizing happiness. It was about giving people the freedom to figure out what happiness means for themselves. That's why he was such a big believer in free speech, even when it meant defending ideas he didn't really agree with. Mill argued that even wrong ideas are valuable. Why? Because truth isn't something that you arrive at once and for all. It's something that keeps getting sharpened through debate and challenge. You've got to put ideas out there, let them clash, and see which ones hold up. This probably sounds familiar, right? It's basically the foundation for the First Amendment. Mill's whole thing was, truth comes from competition. Even false ideas have value. No one has the full truth. Unquestioned orthodoxy can hinder progress. Mill believed that protecting free speech, even when it's uncomfortable or unpopular, it's the only way to keep society moving forward. Now, I've been praising Mill a fair bit, but obviously his philosophy is not perfect. Some critics say that focusing too much on intellectual pleasures feels elitist. Now, everyone wants to read philosophy books, and that doesn't make their happiness less valuable. Others argue that relying too much on the marketplace of ideas ignores how power imbalances can make it hard for some voices to be heard in the first place. Also, where do you draw the line on what pleasures are better than others? Camus talks about this at great lengths on his appeal for quantity over quality, since we don't even know how to measure the quality of said experiences. And all I said about rights? Well, it can get kind of messy when the principle of general utility applies. It's the classic utilitarian dilemma. What do you do when the happiness of the majority conflicts with the rights of the minority? Mill tried to account for this with his focus on individual rights, but even he admitted that utilitarianism can get a little complicated in practice. Whether you think Mill got it right or not, there's no denying that his ideas are still worth thinking about. He wasn't just another academic lost in abstract theory. He genuinely wanted to make the world better and believed that people, given the right to freedom, could figure out how to do that. If this video at all inspired you to learn more about Mill, I suggest reading his book Utilitarianism if you want to learn more about his ideas, and his autobiography if you want to learn more about him as a person and his struggle with depression at a young age. But hopefully, you stop thinking about utilitarianism as a kind of cold equation maximizing happiness. Even if you don't buy into this whole philosophy, it's worth acknowledging that some of Mill's ideas might still help us build a better society today.